I think you've given us some very good tools about looking to not as the Word of God as a way of combating some of the things that the Christians are saying. And last night, taking the text that they use and showing how this is what it actually says. Tonight, when you started out and you said to us that the message is, this is the way to salvation. If you don't choose this, you will be damned. My question is, why does that have traction with Jews today? Why are there Jews? I think most of us here in the room, when you began that sort of pseudo-attack, I discounted it. I'm like, that doesn't make sense to me, that Jesus is the only way of salvation, otherwise I'm going to be damned. But I think that there are many Jews who don't understand that we have our own way of salvation. We do know how to get close to Hashem and what that would take. So I guess it's a long way.
I love what you're asking. I would, with your permission, like to paraphrase it. Thank you. You have no idea how valuable it is that you are here in this room if you only were to hear the question that was asked just now. I understand why people who are born in the church, born as Christians and so on, why people stay in the religions that they're born into. But what is it, in fact, when you heard me expressing what Christians believe, I imagine you felt it to be very alien at least. And that was one of the difficulties that I encountered was, as a young man coming out of rabbinical school, kind of like, what is the attraction of this? Why would anyone believe there was a man in Ohio that had kidnapped 3 women over the course of time, kept them in his basement for about 10 years, murdered a baby? His name is Castro. It's hard to imagine a monster greater than him. Jeffrey Dahmer, who would commit unspeakable acts against his victims. I couldn't even say them in a synagogue. Imagine a lawmaker in any country that would say that these people should go free, and let's take a person who's a law-abiding citizen and let's imprison them or execute them. Such a lawmaker in the United States, Australia, or even Israel would be considered a lunatic. Ezekiel chapter 18 tells us that can never be, and the Torah forbids us to ever practice human sacrifice. It's repulsive. It's an abomination. How then could people do this? It took time for me to understand, but I'm going to impart to you is that the mistake we make is that we do not understand how attractive this avodah zarah, how this idolatry is. It is very powerful. What happens in the mind of the Jew, specifically who converts to Christianity, is they identify not with the text necessarily, but they identify with Jesus himself, the stories. There's nothing more powerful, nothing more influential in the Christian canon than the storytelling of the Gospels. Young man growing up in Forest Hills, New York, attended Queens College, 5'6". He never really made it into that Ivy League school that his older sister made it into, that his brother made it into. He did things that he's very ashamed of in his life. He did things that he will never even ever tell his spouse. He feels filthy and dirty inside. A young woman, 16 years old, finds herself pregnant and has an abortion, and she lives with that pain that she feels she's filthy and she's dirty and God could never forgive her. She feels that she'd been rejected by her own people. When I went to Hebrew school, and I'm not saying I went to Hebrew school, the Jewish kids just never accepted me. I was always an outcast. I never was part of that influential group. I never quite made it in. The Jewish girls wouldn't date me, but Kathy didn't care if I wasn't quite wealthy, if I only drove a broken down Chevy and just, went to Brooklyn College instead of Harvard University. And then they encounter this Jesus figure. One of the most important themes conveyed in the Gospels is that Jesus was rejected by his own, but he was received and embraced by the non-Jew. We're introduced to this idea, this model of Jesus that is so powerful that it is very, very difficult for people to escape. He came to his own, but they received him not. A very important passage. A prophet is not without honor except from his own countrymen. It's a double negative. We find it in Matthew's earliest nativity narrative. There are only two nativity narratives, that of Matthew and Luke. Matthew is a very interesting nativity story. We had this discussion the other night, and the story, some of you are familiar with it. I think most Christians find themselves more familiar with the nativity stories in the Christian Bible than any of the other stories. And the story basically goes that, listen carefully, because you got to pick up this little piece here, this little Matthew and Luke are very different. The story's not only different, they can't both be true. But the way Matthew has it is you have these astrologers, astronomers, these wise men of the east, presumably from Assyria, and they're following a star in the sky, and somehow the star is moving slowly enough for them to follow it. And the star comes to Jerusalem, and they come to Herod's palace. And they inquire, these Goyim, these Gentiles, inquire of Herod, where is the Messiah to be born? Herod then consults the rabbis, the priests, and so on, and they tell him based on but they taste on the text of Micha that the Messiah is to be born in Bethlehem. This star, and Matthew clearly has a magical star in mind, because following a star will be difficult, but what happens next is quite striking. The star then continues to move again, and it stops right over Jesus' house in Bethlehem. Now, I don't know about you, but if you've ever stood out on a dark, starry night and tried to figure out which star is above which house, that would be difficult. Now, I'm not trying to be cute here. What I'm saying is that Matthew is creating a story, is sewing together a story where the star is able to hover right over Jesus' house. What happens then is Herod finds out that the Messiah, who's to be the king of the Jews, is to be born. He, representing the Jews, wants to kill every single boy in Bethlehem. It's called the slaughter of the innocents. And these Goyim, these Gentiles, come to Bethlehem, and because the star finds the spot exactly where it's got a GPS system that would kill any of your androids, and they worship Jesus, and they bring gifts for him, and then they are warned not to go back and tell Herod the location of Jesus' house, and they in fact go back to the east in a circuitous route, avoiding Herod, so Herod doesn't find out the truth. There's something vestigial here. There's an extra piece here. Why would Matthew have the star stop off at Herod's place? If the star is smart enough to figure out the exact house in Bethlehem where Jesus was born, it didn't need the star to go, oh, Bethlehem. Oh, sure, come on, let me show you where it is. So the story obviously this is a setup, and this will set the stage. And this is dark, this is ominous for how the Jew and the Gentile encounter the Messiah. The Jew discovers where the Messiah is. He's in Bethlehem. And what does the leader of the Jews, Herod, want to do? He just wants to kill every single baby born in Bethlehem. No Jew is interested in finding out to discover, where is this little king of the Jews? Where is he born? And what do the Gentiles do? They want to protect him. They adore him. You know how powerful that is to a kid who went to Young Judea, B'nai B'rith, USY, BBYO, who felt the kids in Hebrew school never accepted me. I kind of feel like I'm a bad person. I've done horrible things in my life, and the non-Jews are really nice to me, and they don't really care. And I get this Jesus. He really suffered from the Jews, but you know what happened? He was killed. He died for who he was and what he believed and what he preached. And he was victorious over his enemies because he rose from that bitter, cold grave. And he died for me because there have been men in my life that have betrayed me. There have been men in my life that have been unfaithful to me. I have done things in my life that I'm ashamed of. But Jesus will never let me down. You just heard it all. He paid for my sins. He will never betray me. If anyone tells you otherwise, They do not understand the mind of that Nebuch, that Jew who's now found himself or herself lost in the church. I've done something disgusting when I was 15 years old. And I put on a pretty good show for everyone, but no one knows how awful, what a wretched individual, how totally depraved I am. So the theology of total depravity, the theology of original sin resonates. Jesus resonates. Everyone, my dad let me down. People who should have protected me robbed me of my innocence when I was young. I don't even want to talk about that story that happened when I was a kid, but Jesus will never molest me. He'll just love me. That, my friends, is what keeps people in the church. You just heard it all. That's it. And everyone's going, oh my God, that's terrible. And that's exactly what it is. And unless you, I'm going to say this because I have devoted my life to these souls in the church. Unless you spend time, as my Rebbe taught me years ago, God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth. Try to keep that ratio. People say, what do you do when you sit down with someone who's in the church? I listen. And I listen, and I listen. And then the pain starts to emerge, and the hurt starts to emerge. And then I'm listening, and finally the aha moment goes. But you need to understand why these poor souls have found themselves in such a troubling place. As Aryeh Kaplan, Zachrenu Tzaddik Livracha, told me many, many, many years ago, he said, these are the kids who are young men and women who wind up in these groups, who wrote a book about why Jews shouldn't convert to Christianity and join Jews for Jesus. He says, these were our best kids. These were the ones who had the questions, who were seekers, and just we weren't there at the right time. We're here now with answers. You get it? Well, and everyone's going, wow, that's heavy.